Welcome, ladies and gentlemen. We're delighted that you have come to join us. This is an important topic, and we have a very important panel, people who are experienced in this area and knowledgeable about the area. And the title is A Matter of Degrees, How Education Enriches Us All. So we'll have about an hour or so to do everything. I'm going to ask my colleagues to make an introductory statement, which I'll describe in a moment. It'll go for 3 to 5 minutes. And then we want to include the group formerly known as the audience, as we say in the digital world. And so we very much look forward to your participation in this discussion as well. My name is Ernest Wilson. I'm the Dean of the Annenberg School for Communication and Journalism. And my business is to figure out what the demand side and the private sector and public sector is, as is true with many of our panelists. But I'd like to take a couple of minutes and just introduce a couple of themes. One is that this topic is not only really, really important, but really, really urgent. And I think it's sometimes easy to lose that sense of urgency, so I want to put that on the table. Secondly, it's not just a matter of education, it's a matter of civic pride, of being a good citizen, of being internationally competitive, of learning how to work with other individuals and groups, so that education in many ways is at the core of who we are as a nation and what we aspire to be as a nation. I want to phrase this in a couple of ways. One is that education, especially around the topic of how education can enrich us all, is not only a matter of what happens within the educational sector, but what happens between the educational sector, the nonprofits, private sector, et cetera. So we have a kind of educational ecology, and we need to start thinking about these issues in terms of not just of our own institutions, but as of an ecology. And I'd like to ask my friends who control the technology to switch to slide number 50, if they would, in their stack. And there we go. If you look on the left, initial weak networks, we see the government on top, the private sector in green, universities in that sort of ugly yellow orangey thing, and then nonprofits on the left there in red. On the right, under more robust networks, you see those same nodes, but they have stronger interactions among them. And so if we think about innovation, the cities and regions that look like what we see on the right, they're the winners, because they have strong ties between public and private and research and nonprofits. If you look like that, then you're probably in Silicon Valley, Route 128, the area around Tsinghua University in China, and you win. If you look like that on the left, you're probably, I won't cast aspersions, but Italy comes to mind, having done some research in that wonderful country. And if we could see the next slide, please. Where do we fit in Los Angeles? I just want to toss this out early on in our discussion. Are we on the far left side and we're not doing so great? Or are we perfectly happy and we have great relationships between the sectors? Just as a hypothetical, we'll toss that out. The other issue that I want to describe is what I want to call Talent 21. And at the Annenberg School for Communication and Journalism, we spent the last 18 months or so going around the country asking employers 2 questions. When you hire somebody, what are you looking for? And when you promote someone, what are you looking for? What kind of skills, attitudes, training, experience, et cetera? Now, we, not surprisingly, concentrated in the media and communication sector, but we found that even when we talked to people at Amgen or Ford Motor Company, very similar kind of responses. And those responses yielded the following chart. So if you would please flip to slide number 52, I want to, and this I hope will be something we can continue to discuss. When we asked employers what are they looking for? They said, well, we know we need MBAs. They're very important. And we know we need people with engineering degrees. And that's really important. But there's this third thing, this third group of attributes and competencies that we think we need, but we can't find enough of them. And they include things like thinking outside the box, connecting seemingly random dots with one another to find patterns, the ability to communicate effectively, creativity, and entrepreneurship. So we don't have a name for that thing, so we called it the third space. And so at Annenberg, working with talent agencies here in town, with Korn Ferry, with Cisco, with IBM and other companies, we're undertaking a project that asks, especially for those who are in the private sector, what are you looking for and when you hire, and when you promote, what kind of skills are you looking for? Because I think all of us on the panel probably agree that our job as educators is to provide those kinds of skills. If you go on, I think it's talent-21.org, there's a little test you can take to help us answer what should be in that third space. So let me say that again, talent-21.org. And if you fill out the form, I guarantee you will get a Lexus sent to you in the mail the next day if you complete the form. Right, Ken? You got yours already because he filled it in. Okay, with that as background, let's turn to our very accomplished panelists. And what I want to do is really ask Ross Duvall. I'm not going to do the bio thing because that's in your packet. But take my word for it, they're all distinguished and accomplished people. But I want to ask Ross if he would kind of give us an introduction. They just did a wonderful report called A Matter of Degrees, the Effect of Educational Attainment on Regional Economic Prosperity. I urge you to pick up this summary of it. And I think the original copy costs $50.
Or you can download it for free off of our website.
Okay, that's even better. Ross.
Well, thanks, Ernie. I appreciate that introduction. I'm the numbers guy. I'm the economist. I get to do all the econometrics, so I'll try and keep the numbers out of it as much as possible. But first, I'm going to answer your question you posed.
Yes.
LA's on the left side.
Okay.
I've spent my whole career on this. So unfortunately, we haven't quite made it to the right, but we're moving in the right direction.
Good.
All right, so what's really important? Well, I spend a lot of time in Washington talking to members of the House, to the Senate, members of the administration, and for the first time, I believe, in the post-World War II period, we now have members of the Congress openly suggesting, questioning whether investing in higher education is a good investment. We've really never seen that question before. I mean, that's been the key to boosting American economic growth in the post-World War II period. I think the primary sources of these questions stem from, one, the rising cost of education, of higher education, which has been growing at roughly more than double the overall rate of inflation, combined with recent graduates having difficulties finding gainful employment. Now, I would argue that's principally a result of the severity of the recession. It will take care of itself, but it's a tougher sell today than it's ever been. If I could have slide 5, please. One of the takeaways from the study, we segmented the data in a lot of different ways, but if you look at what is one additional year of educational attainment worth in the United States, overall, it's somewhere between 8 to 10%. However, if you measure it in terms of post-secondary, so if you go from high school to a year of associate, going to community college, the returns to that are over 17%, both for GDP per capita or wages per worker. And that's not just for those individuals, that's for everyone else in those metro areas. And this is across roughly 260 some metros in the United States. Slide 11, I think, brings it closer to home. It's a bit busy. The punchline here is you can explain roughly over 70% of the variation in real GDP per capita across metropolitan areas in the United States just solely based upon the educational attainment of the workforce. It's unambiguous. It's unbelievably strong. Now, there are some areas where you have a higher rate of return. You touched on them earlier, Ernie, in your intro. So STEM areas, software developers, engineers, management consultants, MBAs, there tends to be a positive effect from that. That partly stems from the clustering phenomenon. But I think what's really important to understand and appreciate is that higher education lifts all boats. So when you look at even people who don't have associate degrees in communities, their wages are pulled up as well by those around them. So everyone gains, and I think that's a key takeaway. Unfortunately, the call to action is this, I believe. Among Americans aged 55 to 64, the United States ranks third in the world in educational attainment. Among Americans ages 25 to 34, we now rank 16th in the world. And we're falling further behind year by year. And so we can't afford to wait and have members of Congress question whether this is a good investment. We need to make a compelling case for why that is. Good. Thanks, Ernie.
Good point. Thank you. I'd like to move down the panel this way. And so, Greg, you bring really interesting experience, and you're in a cutting-edge field, and you're doing innovative things. So maybe you could address some of these questions for us.
Sure. And you asked us a question earlier about what are we seeing in our institutions or from those that they're working for, and what we're seeing more of is students and employers, they want institutions of higher learning to think more than just about the education, the knowledge you're delivering in the classroom every day. And they're asking us to think more about how we take that and connect it to somebody's career. Mm-hmm. Not in the last month or two out of 2 or 4 years or 6 years with them, sprucing up a resume, but from the very beginning. So you've got, 80 million people in the labor force that don't have a bachelor's degree. They don't all need one, but there's many, many people who need some form of higher education, and they need help early on when they're working with any institution in this country to think about what they're trying to tie it to, because they're making a major investment in most cases. And if you're not thinking about where they're trying to take their education early on, and perhaps giving them something else they're crying out for. They want some validation, right? Every step of the way that they can take into the marketplace, and they can deliver to an employer and say, look, I have more competence in this area. I'm employable in this area. They're looking for that. They're looking for that validation throughout their time with an institution. And those are the things that we're working on at University of Phoenix and our other universities around the world, is to try to sit down with employers, right, to try to connect the skills gap. The governor and I have talked about many times the millions of jobs there are that can't be filled in this country because we simply have not taught those skill sets to people, which is why companies go outside the U.S. to get those skill sets.
That's very, very valuable. Governor?
Well, picking up on what Greg was saying, I've spent most of my life in public service. I've enjoyed every moment, even the bad ones. But I try and think in those terms when someone approaches me with a problem. I think, well, what's good for America? And what's good for the next generation? What's good for California? What's good for LA? Certainly, trying to match up available jobs with people looking for those jobs but lacking skill sets, that would seem to be a no-brainer. That would be good for everyone. And so one thing that excites me is the opportunity for traditional higher education plus online education to help target education to specific skills. Let's take technical skills. Cisco will just enumerate what they're looking for. IBM will just give you a list of skill sets you have to have. You don't necessarily need a bachelor's degree or an AA degree, but you have to have certain skill sets. And so one thing that excites me about helping America become competitive again, growing our GDP, is to make sure that people who want to take 2 or 3 courses. It could be from UC Berkeley, it could be from Apollo, it could be from any reputable content carrier. You then go to the employer looking for those skill sets. You've got your certification, and you have a job that presumably enhances your compensation, $10,000 a year, $25,000 a year. You as an individual feel better about yourself. Your family feels better about it. You're growing the economy. You're making us more competitive. So it just seems to me to be a no-brainer. And why it's taken so long to realize that part of the answer for those who can't afford or have the time or inclination to go sit in a brick and mortar university, and I went to Stanford, I went to Columbia Law School. They're great universities, MIT, Harvard, and I think they'll always have a role, maybe largely in research, but they'll always have a role, and maybe in general education. But for sure, online education is cheaper, more available, and can get people jobs quicker that pay more money, and they're going to feel a heck of a lot better about themselves. Their family will feel better about them, and America will be closing the skills gap. So that's what excites me, Ernest. It's not maybe a profound thought, but in politics, you always look for solvable problems. We can solve this problem in America, and it kind of amazes me that we haven't yet. But if we just recognize, okay, you can take a course at UCLA, you take a course at Stanford, you can take a course at NYU, but if you don't have time to take that course, if you can take it online, you can go to the employer and say, I have the 3 certifications you're looking for, please interview me, I'm your person. You're doing a service for that person, you're doing a service to the country.
Good, thank you. Faradun, for the international perspective, all the way from a neighbor from our north to in Canada, I wonder if you could share your thoughts on these issues.
Thanks, Ernie. I think the conversation we're having here today is quite timely, and it's an urgent conversation that we all must have. And I wish that we have much longer time to devote to this conversation, because we're only going to be able to scratch the surface of this very broad and complex issue. I can tell you that having studied and worked in 3 different continents, and having worked on both sides of the equation, both for the private sector and the academic sector, I can tell you that when I hear the question of is a post-secondary degree is still a good investment, first I need to just hide my little spike of irritation that what kind of a question is this? But then I decide immediately that I need to treat it with respect and answer it with respect, because it's an important question. The answer is absolutely yes, and we need to invest even more. So let me try to give you just a little bit of global taste, global scope, content to this question before we can localize it and we can really put our hands on some practical interventions. The world is changing at an unbelievable pace. Starting with the communication revolution, everything has changed, and everything is affecting both the academic institutions, private sector, business, everything, governments. The rise of the middle class in Latin America, in China, in India is affecting us all. So we can't just sit in our own geographic location, jurisdiction, and say that we're going to try to address this just from this perspective. It's just not going to work. How do we approach this issue? First, well, given my engineering background, I look at some very complex issues and try to simplify them. Universities must be the place where scholarship is respected and practiced. Whether you're an undergraduate student, graduate student, faculty member, it's a must. This is where the new knowledge is created, and it is used, and it's disseminated to our students. So we're not just talking about students having access to knowledge and using that knowledge. It has to be a problem-rich environment in which the students will really flourish. Number 2, then we are looking at, in addition to this immense depth that we expect our students to have, how do we broaden their perspective? How do we get them to understand the world around them and really connect what they're learning to the world outside? So let's face it, it's not just the expectation of the employers that the graduates should have certain skills, we have some serious problems. We have water, we have energy, we have hunger, we have security, and I can give you a whole list. We have to find solutions to those. And I think I am reaching towards the end of my career. Who's going to find those solutions? She is sitting right here. So we have to make sure that they are given the best type of education available to them. So how can we have the best of both worlds? We talked about expectations of the employers from graduates. So there are two alternatives. One is wait for the finished product and then pay, and then later complain that, well, I didn't really get what I wanted to, or participate in the production. And this is what my university has been doing right from its inception, that for every student, well, it's not all of them, but great majority of the students, for every term they study, they have to go out and work in a related discipline, that they will gain practical experience. It won't stop there, it just doesn't stop there, and bring it back to the university. So we are relevant, there's tremendous depth, but at the same time, the students gaining enormous breadth. And then if this is happening in an environment where people in the private sector are participating in the development of curriculum while fully respecting the academic nature of the institution and doing it vice versa, is one of the best ways to ensure that while we are deepening our knowledge, we are able to really put it in practical use. So this is one of the models. So I try to quickly give you where we can start at a global scale, but bring it to a local scale that not only the employers in the immediate vicinity can benefit from, but also from around the world. Just to give you one very quick figure, Ernie, last year we had 16,000 students worked as co-op students. Collectively, they earned $189 million. We charged the largest tuition in Canada, and yet most of our students graduate with no student debt. And 98% of our graduate students, they are employed within their 6 months of graduation. So there is really a big impact on combining the two. It's not easy. We have to be out, we have to be listening to the employers, we have to be in contact with them all the time to make sure that neither side is disappointed.
Thank you, Ferdinand. Those are impressive statistics at the end there. Very interesting. As we met telephonically several times, the panel did, we thought it would be a good idea if we were going to talk about education to include someone who is actually going through an educational experience and listen to another generation. Now, someone reminded me that all of us are going through educational experiences all the time, but we were lucky enough to get Udita Srimushnam, who is a graduate student in communications management, just so happens to be from the University of Southern California. But
Funny how that happened.
Funny how that happened. But I do have to admit that she made an earlier error in her educational experience because she went to that other place across town. So those of you in the room who are from LA, you'll know what that place is. But I do want to thank Udita for joining us, and I'd like to call on her to make her contribution to our discussion.
Sure. About a week and a half ago, Dean Wilson and I met and had started to have a conversation about what does it mean to be in a graduate program today, and what does it mean to be a consumer of education today. And I started off by telling him that I'm a child of immigrants. My parents came here from India in 1980, and the story of our family and the fact that our family is even here and can do the things that it does, it's all a function of the educational background that they have. That's what got my dad here. That's what got us the standard of living that we have. And my grandparents made enormous sacrifices so that my parents could have that. And that sort of bedrock belief in education is something that has always colored my life. I knew I was going to college when I was 4 years old. I knew I was going to grad school because on the day I walked from my graduation at UCLA, while I was still in my cap and gown, my mom came and gave me a hug and told me she was very proud of my accomplishment and then looked me straight in the eye and said, "But you know you're not an educated person until you have a master's degree, right?" I was in my cap and gown. And she was like, "This is great, but really, you're not an educated person until..." And I tell that story because it's a funny story about my mom and very much in character for who she is. But also because I think it really does demonstrate what my parents and my family's philosophy on education is, which is that it's sort of the highest return, lowest risk investment that you can make in yourself. And I think I today would agree with half of that statement. I think we've seen some really compelling evidence, and I can certainly tell you from my experience that it's been an incredibly high return investment. It's been transformational for me. It's been empowering. I've gained skills, knowledge, a professional and personal network. I've had incredible work experiences while I've been in grad school, and not relevant to you all, but certainly to me, my mom is very pleased to be coming to graduation soon. But I would no longer agree that it's a low-risk venture for students who are thinking about school today. And there are several factors to that. First, the cost of being in school has skyrocketed. I'm sure you've all heard the stats, I'm sure you all know, but from a personal context, my brother and I both graduated from UCLA. When he started in 1998, the average cost at a UC per quarter was $5,380. In 2008, when I was finishing up, the average cost at a UC per quarter was about $8,000. That's a pretty significant jump in the course of 10 years. A college education that a scholarship fund Governor Davis set up helped pay for, by the way. The other issue, it's not just that it's more expensive to go to school, it's that the cost of funding your own education has gone up. Graduate students take Stafford loans, but the interest rate on that is 6.8%. And those Stafford loans don't cover the cost of full tuition, so you roll into Graduate Plus loans, which have an interest rate of 7.9%. We've heard a lot about the kinds of things institutions do to support undergraduate students who come in and need financial aid, but a lot of times that kind of support isn't available to graduate students. I was lucky enough to get a work-study program through Annenberg, but not many of my colleagues did. So now we're talking about the cost of school going up, the cost of financing going up, and all of that would be great if we all knew that as soon as we graduated, we would have the ability to pay those loans back, but we don't. Because the unemployment rate for people between the ages of 20 and 24 in March was 13.4%. And certainly some of those people are still in school, but many of them aren't. And then you have the feeling of degree inflation. It seems like everyone has a master's degree. Everyone has a bachelor's degree. What value does that degree really have for the amount of money that you are spending and the kind of lifelong debt that you might be incurring? And all of those are hard numbers that we're talking about, but there are some softer issues as well. Things like today I was at a panel earlier and President Knapp was talking about the fact that 27% of universities are private and 73% are public, and really what we should be worried about is the increase in cost at public universities. And that's true, but for people who are worried about not getting work after they graduate, the name of your university carries a lot of weight in getting a door to open for you in the first place. And a lot of times those prestigious private universities where costs are so expensive are what are going to give you that personal network and getting doors to open in the first place. And so I think the combination of all of those things makes higher education a rewarding but incredibly risky endeavor. I know many people my own age who seriously thought about going to graduate school who would have been incredibly successful in that environment and then looked at the kinds of risks we're talking about and decided that education wasn't for them.
Well, that's a powerful statement and a very personal statement of what we're talking about. Governor, I wonder if you could say a few words about an initiative that you started in 99, 2000. You and I have spoken about that, but that might help provide kind of the political framework and the institutional framework for these kinds of relationships that we're talking about.
I will, but first I just want to tell you how pleased I am that you're on the panel. The best idea that came out of our two pre-calls was this panel is going to put everyone to sleep. We need a student. We need someone who's really affected by what we're talking about. And I'm just so pleased to hear your kind of careful analysis, upside and downside, of both going to college and getting your master's. I think all of us in this room, whether we're just starting our education, whether it's lifelong or most of it is behind us, benefit from the system that was in place at the time. But again, as I mentioned in my earlier remarks, we may want to tweak that and rethink it given the realities of increasing cost in the public sector, rising student loan delinquencies, and still not a perfect match between, say, a master's or a PhD or even a baccalaureate degree and your chosen job. I mean, I think all that has to be tweaked. To answer your question, Ernest, I love the state. I've always focused on technology. I always wondered, how did Silicon Valley come to be? How did that happen? In World War II, almost every electronics company was in Chicago. And something called the Stanford Research Institute, which found a way, working with Berkeley, to take academic ideas and find commercial uses for those ideas, either medical or commercial, came into existence, and one by one the companies made the trek out west. At UC San Diego, they called the concept Connect, same idea, put academic innovation in touch with entrepreneurs and venture capitalists. Those were really the three legs to the stool. Great ideas with entrepreneurs willing to run companies funded by venture capitalists. So along I come in 98, I'm elected. In 99, I run into Richard Lerner, then the head of the Scripps Research Institute, and one of many people who may be in line for a Nobel Prize someday. And he says, you have a lot of extra money because the dot-com boom. Don't waste it on ongoing programs, which I was already pre-inclined not to do. He said, spend it on creating better research capabilities at the university. So we created 4 institutes of science and innovation, all in different disciplines. I won't go through the weeds, but we had a contest. We had Dick Atkinson, then the president of the University of California, said, I'm not going to pick between my 9, now 10 campuses. So we had the head of the Nobel Committee for Science, David Baltimore of Caltech, also a Nobel laureate, the head of Stanford, John Hennessy, Richard Lerner, and one other people, choose between 14 applications between the 9 campuses of the UC system, and they had all kinds of different disciplines. The very short story is we created 4 different institutes: Quantitative Biosciences, which works with UCSF principally, and is in the Mission Bay campus right next to Genentech. The building actually opens in Genentech, and the director is Reg Kelly, who was a former chancellor of UCSF. So he's got 70, 75 companies incubated, one of which is a $1 billion company up in Emeryville. Then we have the California Nanosystems at UCLA. Their primary financiers are Hewlett-Packard and Intel. One of the things I said, none of the ongoing costs of these institutes is going to be borne by the state legislature, because I didn't want these great research ventures to be at the tender mercies of the legislature, having seen them up close and personal. I wanted to have the private sector make decisions what's best for them based on what their current needs are. This is really kind of an extension of the old Bell Labs. That's what we're trying to replicate. Telecommunications in San Diego, Irwin Jacobs was really the moving force there. It's going to be called the Qualcomm Institute. And then CITRIS, which is, I can never remember what the acronym stands for, but the research in the public interest. And they're doing a phenomenal job, all 4 of them. And people from Saudi Arabia, Japan, even the president of China. The president of China, when he visited LA last fall, Ross, you probably know, he wanted to go to the California Nanosystems Institute because his science advisor had spent 6 months there. But unfortunately, when we built that at UCLA, there was no space, so we had to build on top of a parking garage. So the president has to wind his way up through 5 stories of parking to get to the institute on the 6th floor. So the top floor is the first floor, and then everything that goes down. And they said, well, what if there's an emergency? We're not taking the president down to 6th. So, but he wanted to go there. So these institutes have gotten international acclaim. When we opened the Telecommunication Institute, which was the first, the president of MIT was standing next to me, speaking at an innovation conference the next day. But he said, I'm not really here to do that. I want to see what you're doing. And if it's really good, we're going to copy you. So I'm just saying, Richard Lerner's idea, blessed by David Baltimore, John Hennessy, and Nobel Science laureate, and the president of SC's, Dr. Sample. They picked the institutes, they picked the sites. We've celebrated our 10th year, and I guarantee you, and they're working on stuff like a hybrid that will go 250 miles, an all-electric car that can go at least a couple hundred miles, all kinds of treatments for cancer, for disease. So it's research that has financial implications, but it's also in the public interest. So it excites me because it's the private sector basically making the calls with the universities as to what research to pursue. And it will have financial benefits to the private sector, but it'll also have societal benefits that will keep California at the cutting edge of research. And I think it's a collaborative model that will be instructive to research universities around the world.
Governor, it's glad to hear that someone has actually read my academic research, because I just spent my whole career documenting that exactly.
Well, Dr. Lerner probably read it. And
He did, actually, yes.
Well, I wonder, one of the themes that's coming out is the importance of linking up with employers and researchers and those beyond the university campus. And we're not always good at that at universities. We tend to be sort of inward looking. And so, Gregory, I wonder how you, maybe just tell us concretely, do you send people out to talk to the employers? Do you have an advisory group that does that so that you know what the students need to learn? But how do you practically reach out to the people that you've described as your partners?
Well, we have a team of several hundred people that focus their entire day on about 2,200 relationships with Fortune 1000 companies. And they listen to them. They ask them what's important. I think what we've heard here are examples of, with all due respect, even people who are next in line in their family and their families provide for them to go to college. Now let's take a step down from that and think where most people are in the country and the world, where life got in the way, more than with any of us even, right? And they have that challenge. Now they're past the prime age of school and they have a job or two jobs. Oh, and now I have children, right? So now we talk about with companies about trying to close this skill gap, but look at the cross-section of America. Let's just look at reality here and not Princeton, Harvard, Stanford, any of the schools that many people went to in this room or were fortunate enough to go to. And what those companies want to do is they want to put $2 trillion back to work in this country that's sitting on the sidelines. That's the capital sitting on the sidelines. Right. How do you do that? You do it with human capital, first and foremost. If they can't get it when there's 23 million people on the sidelines that want in, they want to get in the game, that's an issue. So I sort of back up and say, what are we missing? What needs to change post-high school, right, in our case? Right now, we have people that go to traditional schools, in many cases, and they go sit into a classroom and they listen to someone lecture to them for 2 or 3 hours. My kids are learning more playing video games, figuring out how to be general managers, right, in a football game. And they're learning on iPads and iPods, and they're going to go to school in a couple years and sit in a room with columns, right, and marble and listen to somebody preach to them in the back. And we're going to define a credit hour the same way we do during the agricultural times. We have to move forward and reinvent that system. That means delivering knowledge to people quicker, more efficiently, more economically for them, $30,000, $40,000, $50,000 a year. Come on. That's not reality except for the great brand name institutions. They'll be around forever. They're figuring out cures for cancer. They do great research, and there's a few that are lucky to do that. But we don't live in a society anymore where it's okay to educate the top 15 or 20%. They're the leaders. They create all the jobs, and everybody else follows. That's not the way it works anymore. So what we talk about, to answer your question specifically, is we talk with them about how they can best employ their capital and grow, right? Just like I was sitting in a meeting in China a month or two ago and talking to folks about education in that country, and we're building in China now, and you're in the room with the employers, with Apple, Lenovo, Ericsson, Baidu. Guess what you're talking about? how you're going to power their human capital so that they can continue to grow at 8% in that country, or 9%.
Let me press you a little bit on that. So you've got a bunch of folks who go out and talk, but I want me be a little more granular. I mean, sort of, how does a conversation in Shanghai or in Chicago get translated into a new online course? Do you have a dean who has to approve it? Do you? I mean, how does it, sort of?
But honestly, you have to be willing to challenge the system a little bit.
Right.
And challenge the deans a little bit.
Right.
And
I'm not sure I agree with that part, but go ahead.
Look at Len, I don't do that, so you know. Or on the parent corporation.
Or someone else who does.
I just put pressure on the other people.
Right. That works.
No,
That'd work.
But if you want to get results, you need to listen, and that's what we're doing. I mean, in our case, we have hundreds of people that build relationships where, the fastest part of our student population is coming, growth part is coming within corporations. We call it our workforce solutions teams. They're out talking to companies, and they're figuring out their needs, and they're willing to change what they do internally. It's not so much you're customizing something for every single company, but you're just trying to understand how quickly and efficiently they need human capital delivered to them, and it's going to be a lot different in 5 years than it is today.
I would say this, Ernie.
Yeah.
You look at the higher educational system, and let's be honest, it hasn't seen the productivity increases that other sectors have had. And I think the only way it changes, despite, I know you're changing things, despite that, is you have to have disruptive innovation from the outside. And private for-profit institutions, in my opinion, are the best hope to change the higher ed system in this country, because they typically have competed on brand for the most part in the past, and price has not been much of an issue. But when you start introducing online learning, a degree path where it may not actually lead to a degree, it might be a certificate to be a bookkeeper, you could become an accountant, maybe you go on and get a bachelor's degree. I think that is what forces the reforms in the educational system, that we get some efficiency in it. It's just not efficient.
Farah, let me ask you, and then we'll open up to the floor. Mechanically, how do you do that? I mean, the University of Wellington's over here, your private sector potential employers over there, and somehow you want to convince your faculty to teach new stuff that reflects what these guys are saying. So how do you do that mechanically? Do you walk over there and they fill out forms, or how do you do that?
It's a matter of culture. You have to bring people into that culture. You have to have that culture established. And in my case, we were born with that culture. We were born into that culture. That's how the university was created. But I'm also a firm believer of change. We cannot. I mean, this is something that there's this a common joke, I guess. You can hear it wherever you go. That how many faculty members does it take to change a light bulb? And the question is, change?
I'm writing that one down. I'm definitely writing that one down.
Two things. You pay a lot of attention to who you hire. There has to be a lot of depth committed to research and discovery.
Yeah.
And one of the differences that you will find in my institution that will be quite different here, that you produce your intellectual property, it belongs to you. Okay? So it's a tremendous incentive for them to come and work in that environment, have this really interactive relationship with the world outside. Number two, there's this huge machinery. Hundreds and hundreds of people work there, and their job is to interact with people in 45 different countries and thousands of employers to make sure that we really, truly understand their needs. This is not where we're stopping. I mean, this is what we're doing today. What we will be doing, as you mentioned, 5 years, 10 years from now, will be quite different. We ought to use start with a blended system, and I have no idea where it's going to end up. But it has to be a blended system. We have to be more efficient. We have to be more productive. One other thing I can tell you, Ernie, more and more students now, as they're graduating, as I'm asking them, what are you doing next? While I'm going to this fabulous grad school, I have 5 job offers. More and more students are telling me that they are starting their own company. They are more confident because of their exposure to the world outside. One good example, I'm sure many people in this room will be familiar, is the inventor of BlackBerry was an undergraduate student at Waterloo, and through 2 things. One, his deep commitment to science. Second, his exposure to the world outside enabled him, when he was a final year, senior year undergraduate student, came up with the idea. And more students are going through that route.
Right.
This is a big economic incentive, not just to the university, but to our regions, to our countries, and to ensure that we are not waiting for them to spend 10 or 20 years before they could gain that confidence. They are graduating with that confidence.
Ernie, I just wanted
Yes,
to make
sure.
one point, because I notice as a good dean, you're reflecting the views of the academic senate, so I deeply respect. Maybe may not be so quick to pick up on the realities of the marketplace, but your graduates are picking up on the realities of the marketplace. And just tell them this. The great thing about America is we all dream. We all dream for ourselves, for our children. We all want something better than exists today. But every dream begins with a job. And the quickest way to crush a dream is not to be able to find a job. So you're doing your graduates a great favor by attuning your curriculum to the realities of the marketplace, which are always going to change. They're going to be different 2 years ago than they are today. And so change is not just periodic, it's constant. One final point, the beauty of California, and I think it's part of the DNA. I like to say if you're born in the East Coast, once you graduate, you join a company. In the West Coast, you start a company. I think we just realized years ago Washington, D.C. has just forgotten about us, and we're going to have to figure it out for ourselves, which is why we have Google, Apple, Facebook, Twitter, Intel, Cisco, on and on and on. Because people realize they got to figure it out for themselves. But the curriculum has to give them the chance, and if it doesn't, online education is going to fill the void. So somehow, some way, the youth is going to be served. They're going to get a chance to live their dream, and if they can't get it from the traditional brick and mortar universities, they'll get it online.
If I could jump in for 1 second, Ernie. There's this demographic reality that we are all facing. In my country now, there's 10 working people for 1 retiree. By 2050, you'll be down to 3. So these are harsh realities. In the meantime, the middle class is growing like crazy in other parts of the world. This is a huge economic incentive for everybody here to make sure that there will be things that we can offer. At the same time, there's going to be tremendous pressure on our educational institutions, because each and every one of those middle class youth will seek for a university education, because this is what we've been saying. Your study shows you go to college, here's what you will earn. So these are the realities that we need to be prepared for.
I'd like to put something on the table, and then I'm going to call on the gentleman here, and I'm going to ask others. When I first became dean, my mantra was, we have to innovate or die at the Annenberg School. Not well at first, but I said, the good news about the Annenberg School and other private institutions like it is that we're big, we have a great reputation, and we're reasonably well financed. The bad news is that we're big, we're reasonably well, et cetera, et cetera. And I think that we do need a kind of partnership, public and private, where we go out and we ask the private sector what they need, but then the private sector has to say, I will suggest it, but I want to, how can I say this politely? I want to be involved in.
You can't hurt me at this point.
Right. No, I'm talking about we have relationships with Cisco, Verizon, Demand Media, IBM, et cetera. And what has helped is when we go invite people from those private sector companies to come sit in our rooms, in our conference rooms, meet with the other professors and say, here's what I want, here is what I need, I will hire interns. And so I guess what I'm saying is that having that outside partnership is not only good for getting new ideas, but it also shows a little bit of political oomph from the outside. So it's not just an abstract idea. It's, Professor Wolodarski-Berger or Dr. Wolodarski-Berger from IBM looking the dean or the professor in the eye saying, here's what I need. So I guess I hope that we can continue this kind of discussion where not only do professors go outside, but the practitioners come to your universities, to my university, to Wellington, to keep that dialogue going. But yes, sir, in the back. And please just give us your name and
Sure, my name
where
is-
you're from.
My name is Brooke Allen. I'm from New Jersey, and I'm an employer. And as an employer, there's something that I need from your graduates that you haven't mentioned yet. I was at, the head of a placement office was telling me that about 5 years ago, she wrote to the president saying, I have not placed anybody from our early childhood education program in 3 years, and I'm not going to for the foreseeable future because the pipeline's full. And we've had a baby boom and a bust and so on. And the president wrote back and said, and she said, and I feel I have a moral obligation to disclose this to these students because they're going through this whole program with the expectation there's a job, and I can tell them there isn't.
No job.
And the president wrote back and said, absolutely not. Stop collecting the data because what am I going to do with the department? And she said, that's when she realized they're not there for the students are there for them. Now, later, I was asked to talk to a bunch of graduating seniors, and they said, what do you look for in an employee? And I said, two things, integrity and ability to do the job. And they laughed and said, do you mean to say, in this day and age, anyone cares about integrity? Now, the problem is, the head of replacement doesn't care about integrity. I asked her, what did you do? And she said, what could I do? I need to keep my job. Really? She could forward that email to the New York Times. She doesn't have to keep her job. She needs to do the right thing. And when I work on Wall Street, I have no trouble getting graduates who, with economics degrees, who do not know economics. They can't define capitalism. They can't identify supply and demand curve. And if I hint that we need them to cheat and lie, they will bring me the evidence that they're good cheaters and liars.
God.
There's a problem, and you haven't even mentioned it yet.
Ross.
Let me take the first crack at this one.
And one last thing. It's not good enough that the average be good, right? The worst has to be good. It's not good enough that we help 80% of our students and it's just a horrible financial decision for 20% of them. Toyota recalls their cars when 1/100% of something is wrong.
Right. So
Good
my
point.
reaction to that will not be very popular with many from the university arena. I would say we need to change the student loan system. And I would say that universities need to be put on the hook for 50% of the student debt if it's not being paid back. If they can't find gainful employment, then the university has to start servicing that debt. And I think you might get incentives to align a bit better.
Interesting idea.
And maybe you wouldn't have that department anymore if there were no jobs for people. So, I mean, that's a out-of-the-box way to address it. And actually, the provost of Stanford agrees with me. And he will be putting forth and advocating a program that does essentially that.
You reminded me of something.
Let me
Okay,
just
go ahead.
go. Edith, what would your response be to that? The sort of challenge of integrity as something that should be at the core of.
I send all my employees to graduate school and they report cheating is rampant. And so I say, why don't you
Say something, yeah.
And they say, well, I could not do that. I want friends.
Wow. Well, I mean, I'm in a communication program, and we're evaluated very differently than perhaps some of the students who come to you with economics degrees. So I haven't done a single exam that's multiple choice in the 2 years that I've been in graduate school, but I write 20-page papers all the time. You can't really cheat your way through poor ideas. You can't really cheat your way through poor research. It shows. And one of the things that I love about being a student at Annenberg is that almost all of our evaluation, all of our coursework, all of our internships are very collaborative in nature. And so it's not cheating doesn't come up. It's a question of, are we working well together to provide the best product that we can? And I've been lucky enough to be able to do internships and course projects with employers through my entire time at graduate school. And one of the things that I've consistently heard that those employers appreciate is the ability to come in and work collaboratively with the people with you and to put forth a great product that helps that organization. I think if you get what you reward, and if you are rewarding high quality collaborative work, then you're not rewarding cheating, because cheating doesn't give you high quality collaborative work.
Noah.
I actually just finished.
Bring the mic.
Hello. I just finished at UCLA Law. I have to take my finals in a week, but so in that regard, I think I can actually see eye to eye with you that, at least in my experiences, things like cheating and poor ethics really haven't come up in the legal field that I've encountered, both at UCLA and at Hastings. Perhaps part of the issue, I was an econ major undergrad.
You're very smart. I'm not biased whatsoever.
I'm not sure how smart I am because I went to law school.
Well, look at it this way. My boss is a lawyer.
I'm very lucky because I'm employed, but I can't say the same for a lot of my friends who are graduating law school right now. Honestly, when people ask me about law, I don't think they understand just how terrible the employment prospects are. I think all across grad schools, this is something that's not talked about enough. I'll probably have a little under $200,000 of debt, and I mostly paid off my undergrad debt by working a little bit before law school. So that's just law, 3 years. And an MBA is pretty comparable in 2 years. So I guess I would say two things. One, perhaps there ought to be more of a push toward, I'm blank on the word, a professional body, a governing body that actually has ethics and standards in business, like there is for law, medicine, accounting, things like that. Perhaps that's one road to go down, which perhaps is not an academic thing, but is a professional thing. My question, though, would be, what are your thoughts on ways that we can improve the job placement outcomes in the UC system, though? Because right now, I really do feel as though there's just a mill. I'm coming from law school, so I'm very focused on that. But just in general, certainly an undergraduate degree is very valuable, but there's a very big difference between getting majoring in English and majoring in physics as to your job prospects. And my sense is they don't really tell you that when you're 18 years old. So I'm just curious, do you think that we should be telling people that? Obviously,
Yes.
A liberal arts education is incredibly valid for society, but what about for that person?
Well,
Can I answer? Oh, go ahead.
Okay, well, I'll just be, no, first of all, no matter how challenging the job market is, I want you to take heart that Ross's boss is a lawyer. So at
Exactly.
least the lawyers will do better than the
I've
economists.
worked for lawyers most of my career.
So that there's that to look forward to.
Alas.
I do think, one of the challenge, I'm a great fan of the UC system, and everyone who knows me knows that, and I gave each of these institutes, I gave $100 million, I was $400 million, and tons of more money for Mission Bay and everything else. But I think you have to be, if you're going to credit them, you have to hold them accountable. And one thing they don't do well is tell you what skill sets you will need to be successful in your chosen career. Now, they may have some version of counselors. You may be able to divine it for yourself going online, and maybe it's not totally their responsibility, it's partially your responsibility to figure out what courses should I take to pursue a career that I envision. But that should be a collaborative effort. They should be reaching out, you should be reaching to them. One of the, I was talking earlier about filling the skills gap, but one of the advantages of this online education experience is they're going to link you up with employers who say in black and white, here are the skill sets you need. Now, that's not necessarily a degree-driven program, although it could lead to a degree if the student so chose. But I think traditional education has to get better at finding you a job. Again, every dream begins with a job. You have to land someplace that makes you feel good about yourself and feel you're doing something useful and productive.
Greg may have a unique perspective on that too,
I
because
would-
you're serving a population.
Just to answer your question, Noah, I would say the United States government, if they're going to continue to offer the public loans, which we all subsidize, right? Even a community college system, we're paying $11,000 a year on average for them to go to school in this country. They should insist on absolute transparency on the front end. And if you're going to go to one of our schools, the University of Phoenix, you're going to see before you enroll exactly what it costs, every course, the entire program, including how it maps to the career that you're aspiring to have and how much is going to come out of your paycheck for your loan. You need that information before you start college. You have a responsibility too to understand it, to do the work, to have success. It's not all just on the government and the institutions, but you should be armed with that information. My kids are looking at college right now. I looked at 6 schools. Not one of them could I understand what I was going to pay all in for my children. That information, it mandatorily, has to be available for students like you.
There was a study that came out recently that said the elite schools are setting aside tons of money to recruit underprivileged kids. Kids whose parents haven't gone to college. And there's a ton of money that remains on the table every year because it's not just a question of money, it's a question of immigrants coming in, their parents not familiar with anyone who's gone to a university or a college before. So we haven't really addressed so much the fact that inequality in this country is growing by leaps and bounds, alas. The educational attainment of those who are poor relative to those who are rich is declining. So one of the things I think we do clearly have to talk about, in California we see that a lot, is how do you reach out to young people, first generation college educated, poor backgrounds, and what innovative solutions do we have to reaching not the privileged, but the underprivileged?
Can I make one point? Sure. Very quickly, when I was in school, I had this competition amongst all K through 12 schools. And I said, only one school can be best, but every school can get better every year. And when they got better, presumably the students got better. So I think we need a new paradigm. Our society benefits, not just when the top 20% does well, but when 100% does well. There's more money in their pocket, they feel better about themselves, GDP grows, we're more competitive. And so we have to find ways to encourage, through the tax code and other measures, continuous education that improves skill sets that leads to better employment opportunities. Because that gets more buy-in to the American dream, and that means we can succeed at lots of different levels. If you just take everyone making $50,000 a year and move them up to $70,000 a year, that's a huge contribution to the GDP of America and to our collective skill sets. Everyone's focused on the elites, which is great, but to be successful and competitive, we have to lift all boats.
Why shouldn't we just create 100 more University of Phoenixes?
We might.
I think we have, 2 minutes left? So let's take, what I'm going to ask is that you each state your question.
One.
And he keeps doing this.
We're
Okay,
over right now.
we're over? Okay, well, what can I
We'll be here, ask it afterward.
Yeah, maybe you can come up and approach, but I think we have another group that's coming in. But let's give a big round of applause to our panelists for a very stimulating discussion. Thank you. Thanks, gentlemen. Thanks, Greg.